It is definitely very important to be reminded of the life and work of Dr. Jose Rizal, because us Filipinos, who could have forgotten that day when we have opened our eyes and made believe that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword. As we continue our solemn observance of Rizal Day, allow me to introduce our guest speaker for today. He is currently an assistant professor from the Department of History at the Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology. Let us all welcome with a resounding applause, Professor Artchil Daog.
Good morning. Lots of BS in that video. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Jose Rizal was my idol for so many years now. I first encountered him when I was in grade 4 reading Noli Me Tangere. Most of you are probably aware, at least the mature people here, are aware of Noli and Fili. So I'll probably start there because I have only a few minutes. I have 20 minutes, right? 20? Because I can talk all day, right? Okay, so I'll start with Noli. As what the masters of the ceremony today mentioned, probably because that has been repeated. It was our teachers. When we were in high school, it was told to us by our, again, teachers, when you are, or at least the young ones here, when you will be in college, you will hear the same thing over and over again. That's not true. The Noli was written in Spanish. Spanish was spoken for less than 5% of the population. The Moros from the Muslim sultanates in Mindanao probably have more capacity to read Spanish than the Indio majority. You cannot awaken people by using a language that they do not speak, they have no idea of. And well, I guess, as the story goes, misunderstanding. Who was the Noli expecting? It's not the Filipino people per se, as a whole. It's the Ilustrados, the people who Rizal believed to become the future leaders of a future revolution. Rizal was not against revolution. He was against a revolution that will not emerge victorious, or a revolution that will not create a positive outcome. He is against people who would sacrifice their lives for nothing. He's not against revolution. He is a Mason. If you look at world history, probably all of the nationalists and critical revolutions in human history has always been in the hands of the Masonry. And that's because as part of the Enlightenment and modernity, they have, of course, produced, change is an understatement, to change the course of world history. So the Noli was actually against the comical characters that Rizal witnessed in his life. It's more of a confession. It's there in page 1. He wanted to lift the veil that covers lies. And what is the lie? Rizal called it amor propio. Now, in English translations, we simply call it amor proprio, being self-love. No, that's also not true. Rizal was a follower of the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, basically the founder of modern democracy. And Rousseau believed that there are two kinds of love: amour propre and amour de soi, self-love. Self-love is natural, according to Rousseau, because we're human beings. Without self-love, we will not survive. That's self-love. Amor propre in French and amor proprio in Spanish means something more. It means you measure the dignity of the individual based on the materials that he represents. Because he's rich, he's famous, his nobility is part of the social hierarchy or the upper echelons of the social hierarchy. Once you measure human life based on that, you will eventually degrade people who are beneath them. That's the reason why the guy, Rousseau, was literally the one responsible for the French Revolution, even if the revolution happened 1789, it happened years after Rousseau's death. The very reason why, as what the Master of Ceremony mentioned earlier, the pen is mightier than the sword. Rousseau was the subject of that saying. Rizal believed in that. So when you review your Noli, please do not focus on the corruption. The corruption, the atrocities, the malpractices, they were there. In 1789, when Father Jose Burgos was executed, the people already know. Heck, it was miraculous, at least in the eyes of the friars, it was miraculous that there was no revolution in 1792. The people know. They don't need a novel to open their eyes when the atrocities are staring right there in their faces. When their neighbors are being kidnapped by the Guardia Civil. The Guardia Civil, the same institution created by Carlos Barre de la Torre to protect the people from the government, has now become the spy unit of Governor General Izquierdo. Now, they don't need a novel for that. 13 people died in Cavite, sacrificed, because they apparently were supporters of Jose Burgos. Even Rizal himself had to use the name Rizal because he cannot use the name Mercado because of the death of Jose Burgos. Again, you don't need a novel for that. The people already know. What Noli targeted were the intellectuals. Why do you think it was written in Spanish? It was written for those who can actually understood the damn thing. So enough with this awaken the people. To what really? They're already awakened. What they were waiting for is a rallying cry. And that, for them, was Rizal's Noli. A rallying cry. Unintended. But Rizal himself, the genius of Rizal, was that he anticipated that people would actually misunderstand his novel. Is there in, I don't know which chapter, when Father Damaso was having a lecture because of a fiesta in San Diego. What did Damaso lecture? We don't really know. Apparently it was an overly intellectual lecture which the people did not understand. Rizal's term was, when the people were listening to Damaso's lecture, they were just picking or fishing, Rizal's term, fishing for words that they understand, tie them all together, and make something out of it. So whatever the message Damaso was talking about, totally lost in the signifying chain. So no. The second novel was actually written to prevent the setback of the first novel. When Rizal arrived, probably, ni bukad ang atay ito kasi ang kasikat tungkol sa Noli. When Rizal came home for the first time ever since he was in Europe, he learned that there are secret societies forming up because of his novel. And he did not agree with that. He wrote El Filibusterismo, but then he was really in a bad shape at that time. His love life is crumbling down. His allowance did not really push through. He was living in poverty all over the place, and he was relying on parties just to eat. And it brought out the darkness in him, perhaps. Wrote El Filibusterismo. So demonic, maybe. It was actually longer than Noli Me Tangere. But of course, we all know that the Fili that we got are actually the short version. What was it for? It was to prevent revolution, not support revolution, prevent revolution. The problem in Noli Me Tangere is that the people have weaknesses that they have to answer before a revolution can launch. And as long as that problem stands, it is an illusion to even think of revolution. And as long, well, it says there again, page 1 of El Fili. Sikitur ad astra. Such is the way to immortality and the stars. But be careful. You still have weaknesses. You still have personality deficiencies. We still have the Capitan Tiagos, the Doña Victorinas, the Doña Consolaciones, and whoever. We still have the Maria Clara. We still have the Juan Crisostomo Ibarra. We are still having the same people cursed by amor propio. Maria Clara, who would have thought that this woman would become like a model for women at some point? A woman whose only decision in life led to her death. A very miserable and tragic character. Juan Crisostomo Ibarra is usually aligned as Rizal in Noli. In fact, in one of those stupid social media memes where someone asks if Rizal and Ibarra are one and the same. No, they're not. If your teachers tell you at some point that Rizal was Juan Crisostomo Ibarra embodied in fiction, that's totally wrong. Who said it's wrong? Rizal himself. Well, Rizal himself said, if you confuse Jose Rizal with Juan Crisostomo Ibarra, then clearly you have not understood what you're reading. There are so many misconceptions about Rizal. El Filibusterismo became a fuel for a revolution. Again, misunderstood. If we look back at Rizal's life, it's actually a parade of failures. The Noli failed. The Fili failed. In 1892, when he returned, and it's actually nice that the Master of Ceremony stated something about living a life and then you have to die when you have the opportunity. Why? Because in 1892, the guy literally wanted to die. He wanted to die December 30, 1892. And he kind of like set it up. Created La Liga Filipina out in the open. In the open. Remember, in your Philippine history, you were told the Katipunan had to hide themselves. La Liga is in the open. It's an invitation. When Rizal was told, don't go there, don't go to places because you may be assassinated by the friars, no, he did. Went out in the open, visited relatives, created La Liga Filipina. Do you know that La Liga Filipina only existed for 4 days? It didn't have any sense of direction. For 4 days. And then Rizal was out. The friars wanted him, allegedly, of course. The friars wanted him dead. The Governor General, who really loved Rizal, and my colleague would say, maybe because the Governor General is a Mason himself, had to take Rizal out of Manila and sent him to Dapitan. Rizal was really pissed when he was in Dapitan. Two things made Rizal really happy in Dapitan. Winning the lottery, kasi po siya mo patadog loto, like ever since, he's an addict, and Josephine Bracken. With those two, Rizal had a change of pace in his life, but that's another story to tell. In December 10, 1896, when the revolution was already exploding, Rizal wrote a manifesto condemning the Philippine Revolution of 1896. Condemned it. It was wrong. Now, people were like, oh, is this true? All I know is that in Philippine history, no one ever questioned the authenticity of Rizal's manifesto. It's true. He condemned the Philippine Revolution. And people are like, how do we reconcile the idea that the man created and supported ang himagsikan, but then wrote a manifesto against said himagsikan? Well, the problem only emerge if you presume that he even wanted revolution. He didn't. He was consistent all along. There was only one thing that's really critical in the last days of Rizal's life. Whether or not he recanted, because he was very anti-Catholic according to the friars. And in order to marry Josephine Bracken, he had to recant and go back to the folds of Roman Catholicism. You have no clue how different Jose Rizal was in his conception of God, in his conception of rights, in his conception of science, in his conception of faith, in his conception of religion, how different he was from most of us. If you think he is the typical makadiyos, makabansa, the same way when we say the panata, nah, not really. The guy was a master of critical thinking in an age in the Philippines where critical thinking appears to have been suspended in the name of politics, in the name of kissing the ass of Spain. But Rizal himself would admit that he did. When he was about to die, he wanted to face the firing squad. Why? Because he never betrayed Spain. Spaniard for life. Spaniard and Filipino all at the same time. He was not a nationalist. He was not a precursor to Francisco Franco. He was Spaniard and Filipino. Patria chica, patria grande. That's who he was. Problem is, in the Philippines, we have so many BS about Jose Rizal. I'm not even sure if the Rizal that we are commemorating today, is the Rizal who died. A few days ago, the one who contacted me about this engagement asked me, is it all right if we're going to have a wreath and a picture of Jose Rizal in the amphitheater instead of the statue in the city plaza? And I said, I don't really care. Doesn't make a difference. Monument or picture. The thing is, it's the mind that frames the significance of the individual. And wherever you are, that's where your mind goes. So it doesn't matter. So the Rizal that you may remember, the Rizal that you may know, the Rizal that you may embrace, sad to say, may not necessarily be the Rizal back then. I would probably, if you're so interested with Rizal, to read the Noli and the Fili and Rizal's letters to the young women of Malolos and Rizal's letters to Father Pablo Pastelos. Maybe even that can give you a Rizal that is not as what the textbook are saying. Because sadly, for some reason, the Department of Education kind of like a little slow in that department. The irony is Rizal is a mandated course, subject, whatever you call it. Yeah, that was Rizal. Did I have 20 minutes? It's done. I'm not going to talk about his love life because it will go out of proportions, let me tell you. I think that would be all. Honor Rizal, remember the guy? This is the guy I idolized for years. Just his genius is not what you may think it is. But the guy, I'm telling you, the reason why if they ask me to pick, would it be Bonifacio, the social climber, or Rizal? I would pick Rizal any day. Bonifacio was, well, it's not much difference really because Rizal and Bonifacio they're not close personally, but Bonifacio is probably the president of the Rizal fans club in those days. So Bonifacio actually thought that he is doing Rizal's plan. That's why the Katipunan. The Katipunan was actually based on the idea that La Liga Filipina is the Katipunan. That they are the same. That's at least in Bonifacio's fanatic, interpretation. But anyway, yeah, Rizal's dead. Wala tayong nanglibak na, basta istorya ng tao nga wala na. But anyway, enjoy the day and remember Rizal. Thank you.
Alright, daghang salamat Professor Artchil Daog for the wealth of insight, wisdom, and inspiration that he has graciously shared with us. Indeed, it was an awakening, and I think a lot of us will definitely go back to our books and try to read Rizal again. But definitely, today's commemorative program also would like to give the certificate of appreciation, of course, to our guest speaker, and we would like to invite on stage the City Mayor of Iligan, Honorable Frederick W. Shao, City Vice Mayor Manoy Dodong Alimanya, ICPO City Director Colonel Dambes, Councilor Shakur, Councilor Betsy Salsas, and of course, City Administrator Darwin Manubag.